Hey, I'm Robbie Kramer. You're listening to the Leverage Podcast, where we discuss using your social skills to hack dating, travel, finding your dream job, and becoming a complete man.
Yo, welcome back to the Leverage Podcast, guys. I'm here with my good buddy, James Sisson. What's up, James?
Hey, Robbie.
And James is coming from Brazil. He's in Rio right now. It's too bad because the view, literally like a foot to the right of him, is a beautiful view of like the two brothers in Ipanema Beach. Maybe you can show the view. Yeah, show the view real quick. It's tough to see your face, obviously, when you do it, but so dope. And speaking of Rio, that's right where I stayed when we were hanging out in Brazil a couple years ago. And the reason I've got James on the podcast, it's a little background on him. We actually met through my cousin, Steve, and we were in New York. And Steve, like, you know, my little cousin, he's a pretty intellectual guy. He's a PhD student. He's studying to be a professor. He was just visiting me here in Kiev. For the last, actually, he's been here like 3 times in the last month. He really likes the borscht here.
Oh wow!
Maybe it's the girls, maybe it's the borscht. Who knows? But so, James, you're like one of my best like success stories, best students, and I don't want to like take credit for that. It's really more of a testament to you and a lot of the things I want to ask you about on this podcast, and just like someone who like radically implements advice and just runs with it. And I just want to tell the story about how we met because it's pretty interesting. So we meet through my cousin Steve and my
yeah.
What were you doing that day?
I remember this. So Steve was in New York and messaged me to come meet him at a bar with some of our other high school friends. And I've known Steve for about 25 years now, like more or less. And so he's been a good friend since childhood. And I got to the bar and people were sitting. It was a Sunday, like drinking beer, watching football. And I was like, I don't really feel like doing this. Like I want to go out, like meet new people, do things. And Steve suggested we go to a lunch with his cousin Robbie. And he had told me about like Robbie's work in the past. And it was really interesting to me. And I just was like, okay, yeah, let's go. Let's go to lunch with your cousin. So we left our other friends, and I got to meet Robbie. And
I didn't even know that you guys were at a bar before that watching football. So yeah, I didn't even think he told me. Maybe he said, "Oh, I'm coming with a buddy," but he was like, I hadn't seen him in, I don't know, probably been like 6 months or something. And so we meet up, and you're there, and usually when people ask me like what I do, and I don't like to, I mean, I say it, right? But it's like, yeah, I'm a dating coach. And it can be almost, it can make people uncomfortable. If they're, if for some reason they think like maybe I'm implying that they could use some help or something like that.
Right.
Like I'm never doing that, but I don't know. I've always had that kind of like, I guess it just makes people uncomfortable sometimes. And, and then all I remember is like you started asking me tons of questions, and Steve was asking me tons of questions, and I was like, "Oh, okay." So he's definitely not uncomfortable with this subject. So I guess Steve had kind of like told you a little bit about me or whatever, and then all of a sudden I was like, "Oh, I feel like I'm now like pitching this guy." So it was like just a lunch with my cousin to like, oh, like here's a guy who seems like he's really interested in. And like, doing this work, which never fucking happens. Like, no, I think you're probably the only guy who's ever signed up for the Leverage program from like a one-on-one meeting, like with a friend. Like almost everyone who signs up comes through either by listening to this podcast or goes to the website and takes the quizzes, watches the videos, sees me on the 21 convention. Just because like people have so much pride and they're like, oh yeah, I don't need a dating coach or I don't need help with that area. That's strange. That's weird. But you were like totally not like that at all, which I wasn't either when I got into this stuff. I was like just I see something that I want, like, give it to me. Tell me more about it. So anyways, you know,
Right.
that day basically became, I was like, I don't know, we were hanging out for like 6 or 7 hours. We went back to the place. Jesse was there. We were all kind of hanging out. And then you signed up for the program. And then, like, I've never seen someone implement all of the, like, step-by-step, methodically implement all of the teachings and the trainings, like, in a more efficient way than you. Like, you went through, like, the entire belt curriculum in less than a year, I think, right? Which I think is...
Yeah, I don't remember the exact, like, full timeline, right? 'Cause it's been, I think, like, almost even 5 years since we first met.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I think if you're curious, if you just kind of let your ego down and it's just like, I'm here to learn, I'm here to make mistakes, and I'm here to grow and reflect and get better, then
And
know, that's kind of the things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, you know, you have to have a pretty, like, in check ego to have that mentality. And at the time, you're living in like Brooklyn, right?
Right. Yeah.
Working as a school teacher. And then within, like, I don't know, what was it? A few months later, you were like, fuck this, I'm out. I'm leaving the U.S.
Yeah.
Moving to Brazil. Tell us about that, because that's such a, you know, there's so many people who, whatever, they go to school, they become teachers or whatever job they have, and then they just, that's the next 40, 50 years, you know? And
yeah.
it's so easy to
you know,
just
it's
get, like, go ahead.
yeah,
sorry.
the like next step, okay, like get married, have kids, you know, kind of like follow the
Watch football
path,
on Sundays.
so to say.
Have
Yeah.
beers and watch football on Sundays, you know?
Yeah, and it was something that had always interested me, and I think Brazil just kind of was something that I was drawn to. My roommate at the time, who's a good friend of mine still, he was telling me, he's like, oh, my dream's to go to Brazil for the World Cup. Like, I don't know if I can afford it. And I remember one day, like, Jesse was, like, talking and was just, like asking some, like, questions about, like, okay, you know, is it worth it? Like, are you going to regret this money when you're 50? Like, all those things. And I woke up the next morning and I bought a flight to come down for the World Cup. And Danny, he was also teaching with me. He comes out of his bedroom and I'm like, Danny, I'm going to Brazil for the World Cup. Your move. And I showed him the flight that I purchased, and he was like, oh shit, now I got to go through with it. And he ended up coming. We had this, like, incredible 3 weeks, like, traveled all over Brazil for the World Cup, partying, like, experiencing the love and the culture of Brazil. And that was my first experience with it. And when a job opened up in Rio, I just already had this natural connection, and I really hit it off with the hiring, you know, the hiring agents here. So it was just something.
How'd you get that job? So that was after you'd already moved, or you traveled to Rio for the World Cup, came back, and then got the job?
Yeah. So actually, like, a few weeks after I purchased the flights to go to Brazil for the World Cup, I was using this website called Search Associates, and they basically post jobs for international schools and align them with teachers who want to teach internationally. And so you have to get vetted. You need references, and then when schools post jobs, you can apply to them. And so normally the hiring happens in, like, January, February, and it was just a random occurrence that a job opened here because the teacher left. And so I got the job in May, and so I knew I was moving down here when I already came for the World Cup.
Got it. And it was pretty cool because you were making U.S. dollars, essentially, right? The equivalent, but living in Brazil, which is way lower cost of living, right?
Yeah, you know, I'm a teacher, and I live in the best neighborhood in Rio, in Ipanema.
With a sick view of the beach. It's a pretty ridiculous view.
I'm just like a teacher, right? You know, it's like a teacher in New York City can't even afford to, like, live on their own in Manhattan. You know, it's just like,
Well, it's crazy because I mean
the contrast is
the tax system and just like cost of living, and it's just so hard to get ahead in the U.S. on a salary like that. You know, when there's just it's almost impossible unless you have a side hustle going or some other thing, right?
Right.
And you move. You move. That's something I'm so passionate about, is because I've traveled all over. I think I've been to 40 countries, and now I've kind of parked myself in Kiev, Ukraine, which also has a super low cost of living, and for the social reasons, that's the main reason I'm here. But what was it that how did your life change when you just said, fuck it, I'm gonna move to Brazil? Like what did everyone say? Like, I'm sure you got some resistance, right? By family, friends.
Yeah, so I actually, some people definitely thought it was crazy. They're like, whoa, that's, I can't believe this. Other people were just like, man, we're super jealous. Like, well, I would love to move to Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And my family's actually really supportive. Like my mom and dad, like when I was younger, they always encouraged travel. Like anytime there would be a school trip, like when I was in either like 5th or 6th grade, my parents sent me to Russia for 2 weeks on a school trip. And they've always just been like, this is what we value, right? Mm-hmm. Like you traveling. There was like a school trip to Greece and Italy that I actually roomed with Steve on this. And they were like, I took the paper home. I'm like, Mom, Dad, like this is kind of expensive. And they're like, you're going.
Yeah.
Like there's no questions about it. So my parents have always really been supportive and encouraged this type of.
That's great. So have mine, so I'm really, I guess we're both very lucky to have supportive parents that are just like, yeah, go travel, see the world, blah, blah, blah. It's not such a bad deal. And it's interesting because for a really long time, I was traveling a lot, but I wasn't actually ever living abroad. I'd go to Europe for the summer for 3 or 4 months, or I'd go check out this place or check out that place. I had a buddy pass with United Airlines. I was dating a girl that was working for them, so I got to travel for free and fly all over the world for free for a year and tons of miles and blah, blah. But it wasn't until within the last year when I actually moved abroad and moved to Kiev, Ukraine, that I really kind of saw, I felt like I was faking it before. I was a digital nomad, basically going back between LA, New York, Miami, and then abroad, but you don't really kind of experience it until you actually move to a new country or a new place, and then you rent a flat, you start learning the language, then that's a little bit different. So what have you learned from that experience? What can you share with us about that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with those sentiments that kind of just skipping places every month doesn't really give you a full experience of life there. And it's definitely a challenge at times, right? It's like, as you mentioned, learning a new language. Every time I leave the house, I have to turn my brain to think about Portuguese and speaking to people, because there's not really a lot of English here in Rio compared to these European.
There's no English in Kiev either.
Yeah, and it's
But I like that. It's cool. It forces you out of your comfort zone, big time.
Yeah, so 100%, and I would say that's kind of the main factor, is you're just kind of always out of your comfort zone, and you can find and only hang out with people who speak English here in Rio, or only hang out with I don't know, work friends or things like that, and not really engage with the culture to try to. But there's still a lot of instances where you're out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. You could just hang out with expats, I guess. But
yeah,
more so maybe in Brazil. There's not a lot of expats here in Kiev, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and so, but yeah, right. So example, you in Kiev, you're kind of always out of your comfort zone, trying to find how do I navigate these different situations in this different culture. And I think one of my main lessons from this was kind of entitlement. Is nobody really owes you anything. right? Like
Yeah.
everything that you want, like you have to work for. And whether it's through the language, whether it's through like developing relationships, like nobody knows you, right? And like you have to go out and you have to provide value to them. You really have to work hard to develop and create whatever it is that you want. And I think sometimes, like living in New York or where I grew up and had, I had friends there from like very long period of time. It's like you don't really have to like work as hard for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of makes you like entitlement, like, oh, this person is my friend because we've been friends for so long, not because I provide a lot of value into their lives.
Right. Just like a childhood friend. That's an interesting way you put it. I really like what you said about that, the entitlement. And I see it so much in just like the day-to-day stuff. Getting groceries, dry cleaning, stuff that's so easy. Or you can, in the US, you just have Amazon Prime. You don't even have to fucking leave the house.
Yeah. Now they have 1-day shipping.
Yeah. Like it'll be here in 2 hours, right? And versus living here, in some of these places that that don't have all those technological advantages, like you have to like I remember having to get a suit dry cleaned, and I didn't have like a friend to come along with me to translate, and it took me like 2 hours because I didn't know much Russian at the time. I was trying to explain using the limited words I had, trying to use Google Translate, even on my phone, like showing someone Google Translate. It's like I was talking to these old babushkas. They can't even read the screen. They're like what? Stop. I'm like read, and they're like so just the little things that you have to, it really forces you out of your entitlement, and you also kind of feel like an idiot a lot of the time because you don't speak the language, right? And you're trying to get by or just do something simple, and people are looking at you like you're a fucking retard. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, right? So it really pushes you out of your comfort zone. The other thing, I'm curious if you experience this too, but the people you do meet, right, the English speakers or the other expats, like it's so much easier to connect with them because you have that immediate background, right? Just the fact that you speak English. And
100%.
And odds are they're probably a pretty interesting person to begin with if they're there. Just by being there, right? They're probably worth knowing.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely like almost like an instant connection with people from your country or people who are English speakers, because sometimes like that kind of like valve or like a little bit of like a release. It's like, oh yeah, I have something like really in common with this person, and it's just like less friction to getting to know another person, make new friends, have people. So it's definitely like makes connection a lot easier. And I definitely have a lot of friends here that maybe I wouldn't have been friends with in New York,
right?
Because of just like never crossing paths with like industries or things like that. But here it's like all expats kind of have that common bond.
And you had a pretty interesting social circle of guys who were basically setting up Uber down in Brazil when I was there like 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Yeah. It's that's kind of another thing about living abroad is, it's very transient. So a lot of people who I was friends with like my first and second year don't even live in Rio anymore.
Sure.
And so they've kind of moved on, and kind of really being, kind of another thing is with like being uncomfortable or entitlement is like always kind of having to push yourself to like make new friends and really push yourself to be open to new people and experiences in order to kind of keep, your social life alive, so to say.
So tell us, what was something you wanted to add to that, or?
Yeah, no, and just like how also kind of that also relates is like, friends from Uber, different sorts of companies that, in New York you never cross paths with as a teacher.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, when are you going to be friends with a bunch of startup guys for Uber, trying to basically. Yeah, I haven't thought about that, because basically all the guys I know who live here, like, they all do totally different things, whereas my social circle, like in college, for example, is all golfers. So all the guys on my golf team who are now all real estate guys, and that's probably who I'd be hanging out with if I was back in San Diego, right? Or internet marketer guys, or other coaches or mentors, something like that. But yeah, it really kind of gives you a range, just because there's just so few, I get English speakers. Well, so I guess in a way, Brazil and Kiev are kind of similar, just in, I guess, the level of development and the amount of expats there. I think there's probably a few more in Brazil. It's it's not really a bigger city. I don't know, but it's just whatever. But so I'm curious. So you've been there now for what, 5 years, 4 years? How long have you been living there?
Yeah, it's my 5th year.
And you're now married. And I have a few questions about that. You actually met her when I came down there, and we were doing a boot camp. Basically, you met her on that boot camp, which is, or had you met her before that? I don't remember exactly.
Yeah. So my cousin Luiso, I think you remember, was here. He was here visiting, I think, like a week before you arrived, and
the one that lives in Panama, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the one who doesn't like to talk much. And so I had a friend, another American guy, who was like, I go surfing every day to this beach. Like, you want to come with me? And so Luiso and I went with him, like, all the way to the end of the bus line. And so we got it out there, and it was like a Tuesday in January, and there was no one on the beach except for her and her sister. And so I went up to her and I was like, hey, can you, like, watch our bags while we go surfing in Portuguese?
Mm-hmm.
And so she said yes, and then went surfing for a little bit, and then came back out, and we spent the day together, and just like, and the whole day, this is kind of being a little uncomfortable, is like the whole day was in Portuguese. And it's just like, I'd worked so hard on my language skills up to that point, where it was really like paying off to be able to like get to know new people from using those skills.
How long did it take you to get to that level? I'm sure you're way more advanced now, but the level that you could communicate with her when you met her.
Yeah, so my first year, I was dating like a few different girls, and they all spoke English. And then when I got back after my first summer vacation, I was like, I'm only going to date women who speak Portuguese. Like, I'm going to force myself to only be in this language. I'm not going to make it easy for myself to like speak English like all the time.
Yeah.
And so that was maybe like 6 months of that. And I had done lots of like intensive training. I did the whole Rosetta Stone. I did like a month intensive course where every day I would go in the morning to class, and then at night I'd be like, oi, tudo bem? Sou James.
Tudo bem, tudo bom.
Vamos falar português. Yeah. And I would just go up to like random people and be like, oi, tudo bem? Posso falar com você? And then just like have the conversation until I couldn't say anything else. And I'd be like, all right, ciao. Just, like, walk away. And so it was just like lots of practice like that to really get to that point. So it's just like always just like going out and
living abroad. Sometimes the Wi-Fi is not great. So book got booted. I don't know if it was mine or yours. I think it was mine. But anyways.
Yeah. It's okay, right? Like you deal with it, you survive, you move on, and that's just it.
Yeah. So where were we? What were you talking about?
I think we were talking about like language.
Oh, right.
And,
you were
going out and like.
So you had been studying pretty hardcore. How long did it take to get to? Well, let me ask you this: was Portuguese the first language that you learned?
No. So I have a background in Spanish.
Okay.
Through like whatever, however many years in like middle school and high school.
Yeah.
So the grammar is essentially the same. So I think that made it a little bit easier, but still like the pronunciation, kind of the words, the different verbs, everything.
And it took you how long to become like reasonably fluent?
I would say, I don't know, maybe like 15 months.
Wow. Okay.
More or less. Yeah.
I don't feel so bad.
Because we
now.
also, my work is in English. So all day I'm speaking in English. So it's just time like after school or on weekends that, those are the types of hours, vacations to really develop and grow the skills.
Right. And so that's I wasn't sure how you met her, your wife, but I know maybe she came out with us for the first time when.
Yeah, she came out with us.
Okay. Well, before we talk about her, and I'm curious to hear more about that. What was your initial experience dating women from Brazil versus New York?
I just thought, like, Brazilians are just, like, very loving. Like, they just, like, I don't know, like, how to explain it. You just, like, feel, like, it just feels like a lot of, like, love is coming, but not with any expectation.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of, like, and maybe that's not, like, the right word.
Maybe it's just like maybe they're a little bit softer.
Yeah,
more
maybe
feminine.
like softer and just like more feminine, like just like totally kind of, and also like not really into like protocols. Like women would invite me to do things like all the time, like, oh, we're going to this place for the sunset, like come with us, or like it never really felt like
as structured.
It never really, like it just kind of felt like a natural thing where it's like, I like you, you like me, and let's just hang out and like have fun together. And
I can definitely
that was
feel
more of my experience.
And my experience living in New York was, it was similar to the fact that it's like, all right, we're gonna meet this girl on Tinder, and then we're gonna go on a date, and this is gonna happen on the date, or I'm not going on the date unless you take me to a nice restaurant. Or like, I'm not the type of girl to like kiss on the first date. I'd hear like nonsense like that, or just like all these rules, like this idea of how it has to go. And when I was in Brazil visiting you, I mean, I had a girlfriend at the time, so I wasn't like out on the prowl so much. But we were still getting after it, and it was certainly meeting a lot of girls. But it was just a totally different vibe. The women were a lot more feminine, for sure. And I think a little bit easier to talk to. It's also easier, obviously, when you're on vacation, when you're traveling, because you're just kind of in that mode. But I mean, I've talked to countless guys who are like, Brazilian women are the best, and and Brazilian women are great. I'm a huge fan. Love Ukrainian women too, obviously, maybe a little bit more. But if I wasn't in Ukraine, I might be there with you in Brazil. So now you've been there for 5 years, and you said you're still teaching at that school. But I think you mentioned to me recently you have a career change coming or something. Yeah,
possibly. So they have these types of schools all over the world, and basically in like any major city, sometimes there's often multiple international schools in these cities. So we're gonna kind of open up to the same website I mentioned earlier, Search Associates, and kind of try to explore like what other job opportunities could come available for to move in the summer of 2020.
And just to make it clear, so the guys watching and listening to this, like, you're not teaching English, like you're an actual teacher teaching.
It's
like a lot of people
science and math.
Yeah, I remember when I came to your class for that day. I think you had me do
that
was so cool. You had me do a little like guest speech on like Airbnb or something, I think, right?
Entrepreneurship.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was so blown away by those kids. They were fucking amazing, those kids. How old were they? Like What grade was that?
11, 12.
They were asking me these questions. I'm like, oh Jesus! Like I feel like I'm in a panel of like startup guys. Those were basically like the wealthier kids from Rio, right? And their parents could afford to send them to like an English school.
Yeah. So it's like typically like wealthy locals, and then also companies. So Rio has a lot of oil, and so when these like international oil companies send families here, their families need a place for their kids to go to school. So that's basically why our school was created. And a lot of the schools, some of them by embassies, some of them by just like, I think the original start of our school was 17 international companies got together and was like, let's create a school like Coca-Cola, companies like that.
That's probably a pretty cool way to meet influential people too.
Yeah, it's definitely had like different relationships with either like tutoring clients or just like parents that have different kind of backgrounds, like in finance or private equity or like celebrities. They'll send their kids to our school. So yeah, it's definitely like an interesting mix of people who attend the school.
And have you done pretty well tutoring, basically like side hustling?
Yeah.
Rich parents.
Well, tutoring is definitely interesting. At one point, I was tutoring like 8 hours a week after school, and it kind of like wore on me a little bit, right? It's like working an extra a work day, but able to make like an additional like $7,000-8,000 just in a few months.
Wow. So do you? I guess with the cost of living and the fact that were you making more working in Brazil than you were in the U.S., or was it about the same?
About the same. I would say like my equivalent now, especially because I actually get reais. I get the local currency, which is not doing so well right now. But it's still like if I were to convert it right now, my salary to dollars, like it would be about the same as what I was making in New York.
And what do you think the cost of living? How much cheaper is it by a percentage?
Especially compared to New York, I don't know, like maybe even like close to maybe like half, like 60%, right? Like it just feels.
So you're getting you're getting double the mileage for your money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And
not bad.
There's also a lot of So
it's like if you're making 10,000 a month, now you're making 20,000. Like
yeah.
And well, I was going to ask you. So, and what about taxes?
Yeah. So taxes, I pay Brazilian taxes, but I don't have to pay U.S. taxes because I'm like all my income is earned overseas. So
it's called like the foreign exclusion policy or something, right?
Yeah, and I don't make enough to go over that like exclusion amount.
It's 100,000.
So yeah, I don't.
Yeah, as long as you're
okay, 100,000. Yeah,
right. If you're making, if you don't go over that 100,000, you don't have to pay any U.S. tax. Is that right? Or you don't have to pay? Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
And do you? I'm trying to figure this out actually because this will be the first year that I've been fully, not in U.S. soil. Do you know how long you're allowed to be in the U.S. to qualify for that?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think like 30 days, probably the most.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's very cool. So what would you tell a guy who's, obviously maybe not in your exact position, but someone who's, you were what, at 23, 24 at the time, or a little bit older?
Yeah, a little older. I think like 27.
Okay.
I got my job.
So you had been out of school for a few years working, right? And like if someone wants to kind of do what you did, which is, move away, unplug, find be able to maybe have your same career but do it over there, like what advice would you give to that guy?
So what I would think is try to understand what are the opportunities that could lead, like what are the different paths that you could take to get you to the point that you want. So whether it's doing research and starting an online business, whether it's trying to find an international company that has different places around the world, and then maybe trying to get a job, maybe like a hotel or something like that, right? Like hotels are all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe having a specific brand that you get into that could lead you to different international opportunities. Yeah, so I would say those would probably be like the two main things I would think is like, if this is what I want, like, okay, what steps do I need to take to get there?
And
so if that's your...
Any advice on like how to choose a place?
Yeah, so I know a lot of through my experience with interacting with expats is kind of, sometimes you think there's a place that you would really like, and it just doesn't, it's kind of like a mirage. Like I know a girl who left Rio because she didn't really like the dating scene for her here, and so she thought she would move to Dubai, and there's like a ratio of like guys to girls that's better for her.
She wanted a sultan.
Yeah, so she's not competing. You know, she's an American girl competing with like beautiful Brazilian women. Like it's not, you know, the best for her here. And she's like, oh, there's tons of expats and everything in Dubai. Like I'll meet my husband and travel the world.
Uh-huh.
And then after 2 years, like she's already left Dubai. And so it can kind of be like what would, and when I'm looking for a new school and like a new city and things like that, I create like a few criteria of like, what would life be like, right? So, okay, imagine I go to the school and they give me this financial package. Well, okay, what's like a typical rent cost? Or like where could I live, and how much would I be able to save, and like would I be able to travel easily to other cities? So I try to like kind of almost like prototype like what life would be like in a different place. Try to get research, talk to people about their experiences in different cities, and just try to create like a mental image of like what I think my life would be like in those places.
Well, visualization is a very powerful tool, and it sounds like a bit of that is recommended, you think, and I agree.
Yeah.
Like being able to visualize and put yourself there, I think, is really important. When I thought of Eastern Europe, like after traveling, I'd never really I was traveling through Eastern Europe, but I could always just picture myself over here for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to find out that I have like a family from here. My roots are Ukrainian, which is I had no idea until like years later when I was actually at my grandma's funeral, and her sister was talking to me. I hadn't seen her in years, and she was like, "Oh, you know, our family's from Ukraine." I'm like, "What?" Yeah, just started showing me pictures. I'm like, "Oh, maybe that's why I feel so at home." But so yeah, for whatever reason, like I think you're always drawn to a certain place, and I just remember feeling like, "Fuck, if I don't go there and at least check it out for a while, I would feel that sense of regret." And I traveled so much, I was like, what the fuck is stopping me from just like moving over here? And it was really just my dog, because I couldn't figure out how to get Wiley over here. And then, you know, I did the fake service dog hack, and you know, now Wiley's been in 10 countries. He's a very well traveled fucking dog. But
does he have his own passport?
Yeah, he's got his own passport, and I figured out which airlines. Luckily, Ukrainian International recognizes emotional support dogs, so I can fly basically anywhere from Ukraine to Europe with him in the cabin. So that's been a nice little life hack. But that was the biggest thing keeping me from moving to Europe for so many years. Like, oh, what about Wiley? You know. But yeah, there's always a way, because I wasn't willing to put him under the plane for like a transatlantic flight, because I've just heard so many horror stories about that. So yeah, it was funny that you mentioned the girl. So this girl was from the U.S. and she moved down to Brazil, right? And she didn't like the dating scene, so she moved to Dubai. As far as I think the best dating scene in the world, if you're a woman, is the U.S. If you're a guy, it's probably the worst scene in the world, or one of the one of the worst scenes in the world. Like, you can pretty much go anywhere and have it be better than the U.S. But it's the opposite for women. So tell me more about this chick. Like, that's so strange.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I think she just was like, she was younger and just like looking to kind of like explore a little bit before settling down. But I think at a point she was like, okay, I'm looking for a relationship. And now this isn't really the place for me.
Yeah. But she should go to Bali.
Being in Rio.
She could do well in Bali if she's cute. But that's a much better place for sure. Yeah, it's like sometimes, like it would just be hilarious if an American girl came to Kiev and wanted to find. You go to the worst place you could possibly go.
Yeah.
Tons of competition. Like very few guys that you're gonna want, but good luck.
I think Tucker Max talks about this too, or like in his book, right? Like mating markets.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like what are the best like cities, or it's like San Francisco versus if you go to, I don't know, New York, like the differences in terms of like dating and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. So it would not be advantageous for a woman to go to Kiev or Rio. So.
Right. Yeah, that would not be good. So you were mentioning earlier about, you have your life philosophy. You were talking about the table. I wanted to get your take on that because that was cool. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like, I don't know. You've probably gone into like a restaurant and like the table legs are like unbalanced, right? And you have to get like a napkin. You have to like shove it underneath to just get some like stability.
It's my pet peeve. It's one of those fucking tables.
Yeah, it's so annoying. You like put your arm down and then and it creates like a really like awful experience. And so I kind of think of like different parts of life kind of are like those table legs, and like the table is kind of like a metaphor for your life. And so I think there's different parts that are really important to really track and follow and set goals related around fitness, which I think about as like diet and exercise, and then relationships. So it's like friends, romantic relationships, family, like financial, which has to do kind of with like how are you managing things in terms of like, are you having too much debt, or are you able to like save and invest, and professional life, like how's your career going? And then also the fifth one I think about is like self, which is kind of like spirituality, and then a little bit, and then also like learning.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about it, it's like, let's say like relationships, right? Like if you're like a teenager and you're only spending time with your friends, well, like the other area of your life are really going to suffer. So like your school, your grades might go down. So I think like in those different parts, it's really important to really kind of really focus on those in terms of like how you're doing overall. So I think you had mentioned before, right? It's like when you're going through that like 8 months of just like partying, and maybe like your health was like suffering, or your fitness was like suffering a little bit, and it's like, okay, let me like focus a little bit on that, and that's kind of like the napkin that you like shove under, the table to like bring it back.
Yeah, that napkin for me was meditation, I guess you could say. But because I basically spent almost all of 2018, or at least the first 9 months, like hardcore partying and focusing on social skills, right? So that part was great. Like having lots of sex, having lots of relationships, meeting tons of people, new friends, right? But certainly like I got really sick and so my health was suffering, my bank account was suffering because I was spending a lot more money than I was making. And then all the partying I was doing was kind of affecting my mental clarity and my kind of spiritual sense. So, so yeah, I basically like kind of did a hard right turn and just put in, I just built a lot of habits that were kind of the opposite, you know, waking up early with a routine, meditating, you know, cooking, eating healthy food, kind of just went in the opposite way. But that experience partying, like I learned so much socially, which is also, you know, I could kind of write that off as a business expense or also as a business, you know, R&D. So it wasn't total just fuck off, but it know,
it definitely helped your like professional life, you know, that stuff. But like you're taking that learning and kind of passing it forward.
But yeah, it was a very aggressive route. I don't think I would, if I were to do it again, it certainly wouldn't look so much like that. But I wanted to ask you, because like, so you're a student, but you're also, you're a teacher, but you're also an incredible student. And that's, you know, that's really why I was so impressed. You know, of all the guys that I've coached, I think like I'd put you as the best student of all of them.
Thank you.
And I'm not that great of a student. Like maybe I'm okay, but I'm guilty of basically I'll sign up for a course or a program or whatever it is, and you know they lay out a path, and that path is pretty smart. Obviously, who's ever designing the course, right? Like they know best practices, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, right? And I've got this bad habit of saying like, oh, I know better, right? And then not totally doing what they tell me to do, and then I do like the Robbie version of the course, and then a lot of the time I won't get the results, and I'll be like, what the fuck, this stuff doesn't work with the program. And then I think about it like, well, you're not doing the version of the course, you're doing the Robbie version. So who are you to say like, of course you're not getting results, dummy, like you're not fucking doing what they said to do, right? And I notice almost everyone does that to some extent, right? But I feel like you don't really do that at all. Like you were just like, you know. So tell us about that. Do you feel like that's true? And tell us a little bit more about your approach to learning as a teacher, because I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, so I would say, I think me personally is just like trying to take the attitude that I don't really know, right? So if I know somebody's kind of has more knowledge about something, then it's like, okay, you just listen, right? And you just listen, and I think it stems from like wanting to get better, right? So it's like I want this, and so kind of going back to what we were talking about with like how do you choose a city, right? So like you don't really know, but you know people who have the experience that have been there and can give you some guidance. And it's really important to like reflect on that and think like, okay, is this what's right for me? And what they're saying is really valuable, and they're just passing their knowledge to me. And I don't really think, I think it also maybe has to do with the ego of like, I know better.
Yeah.
Right? Like me, I'm Robbie, or me, I'm James, and I know better than this person because I'm smarter or because whatever, right? But if you don't have those like internal feelings or internal thoughts of like, oh, I know better than this person, like you listen and you try it and then you reflect on it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the main, I think kind of like the main steps in like being a student is like, okay, you know, this person says this, I need to try it. Like I need to do something hands-on. I need to go out and practice and try it. And then I need to reflect on it. Because if I don't reflect, I think there was a comment in the group of like, one of the guys posted something and then Jason wrote like this really long response, and then he asked a new question.
And it was the same fucking question, basically.
Yeah, and then it's like there's like where is the reflection on your own part is to like like, okay, what this person's saying is really important. Like they're taking the time to write something, and whether or not I agree or disagree, they're still taking their time to like help.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, they have to sit down at their computer or on their phone, open it up, like use their energy to help you, and then they're helping you. And if you just kind of like assume the best from the other people and their intentions is like, they're not saying anything to like be mean or to hurt you or anything like that, right? It's not about you. It's about like the actions that you're doing and the actions that you're taking. And it's like, what can I do to fix this?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious if because you work, or at least when I was there, it was like the 11-year-olds, right? What is that, 6th grade?
Yeah. Middle school.
And I was really surprised with just like how bright those guys were and girls.
Yeah.
Do you see anything that kids do that's better than, because I haven't worked with kids in, basically ever, right? But sometimes kids are just like easier to work with, or they get stuff differently than adults, or they have less of a filter, maybe less of an ego. Do you see anything there, or any?
That's a good question. In terms of that, I mean, my whole like kind of teaching philosophy for middle schoolers is always like get them engaged and like interested, right? So it's like, in what ways can they be actively like learning the topic? So we do a lot of projects, and like group work and different activities. But in terms of like how they might be different than adults, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I would have to think a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, basically from what I've learned, like however you can get someone to engage all of their senses in learning something, it'll be the most effective. So yeah, projects, working with a group, all that shit's great.
Yeah.
So where are you gonna go from here? What's your plan? And how's married life? You've been married for like a year now or something?
Yeah, almost a year now. Yeah, married life's great. So I'm definitely like learning a lot, like by being a husband. I have my thoughts like we work really well as like a team. And I think that's kind of my like number one, I guess, like overall thought on like our relationship is always kind of keeping our like team, and going back to kind of what I mentioned earlier is like always like assuming the best from like whatever intentions is like, she's always got my back, like whatever it is. And also kind of like being like really like supportive in times like where maybe somebody's struggling a little bit, is like how am I being supportive, and like in what ways am I communicating in order to be like a really supportive partner. Has been something that I feel like I'm like learning and growing a lot on.
Have you studied any or read any books on like that sort of stuff that you could share, or just in general, any interesting books that you've read lately too?
Yeah, so I actually, in January, I did a yoga teacher training for a month, and I like lived on this ashram and ate like a vegan diet. So I've been reading this book now called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and so like kind of the whole like philosophy about yoga, and it goes into like meditation and like breathing techniques and like things like that. So that's something I've been reading that's pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, when you were speaking, it was kind of reminding me of what I'd read in Nonviolent Communication.
Yeah,
by Marshall Rosenberg.
Yeah.
As far as like relationships go, I think that's helped me the most of anything I've ever studied.
Yeah, I actually maybe in the group I can share like the if I still have it. I have to check to see if I still have it. But just kind of links to YouTube videos of his course. It's like 9 hours of YouTube videos. So I've listened to all of those.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great if you could post that.
Yeah, I think those are really interesting, like, to think about, like, in what ways am I communicating that creates like a positive environment?
Yeah, it happened to me just like 2 days ago. I was fighting with a friend of mine, and like just mean text messages back and forth, and then I was like, "Fuck, this is not helping. This is everything is hurting.
Yeah.
How can I change the communication to this is how I feel, right? Without judging or without blaming or without name calling, just as like I feel like this." And it changed the entire mood. Like it went from a fight to like a really great kind of loving communication, and it's crazy how effective that is when you can get out of that like it's your fault, blaming, judging sort of energy. So, and
that's great.
Yeah, so
one from that series, one thing I just remember that I really enjoyed was like when somebody's like telling you something and not immediately going into like solution mode. Right? So it's like they're communicating something and maybe they just need to communicate that, but they don't need you to tell them like what to do.
Right.
Right. And
listening
that was
empathizing.
Yeah, just listening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. So yeah, if you guys are listening and you just want to have better communication skills in general, check out Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, that book or the audiobook, and also he's got like a 9-hour YouTube video. If you just Google it, I think that's the first thing on YouTube. Is that or maybe it's 3 hours? I don't know. But anyways, awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, James. Unless there's anything else you want to leave us with before you go.
No, I think I'm good. Thanks for having me, Robbie.
Yeah. I appreciate it, buddy. And let's chat soon, all right?
Yeah, for sure. Ciao.
See ya.
Thanks for listening. If you want more, go to innerconfidence.com and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for the latest episodes.